What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, May 18th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot to talk about. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. And yes, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3. Getting right on into it, you've probably already heard this. It's all over the corporate media. Just days after there was an attempted school shooting that was stopped cold by an armed guard, which didn't get a lot of coverage on the corporate media, I might add. There's been another spectacular shooting at Santa Fe High School in Texas. 10 people are dead, 9 students, 1 adult, 10 more are wounded. Of course, they're out there pumping this up, and the gun grabbers are having orgasms. The suspect is a 17-year-old student, Dimitrios Pagurtsis, and the police are also saying bombs were found in the area. And this Dimitrios doesn't really fit the pattern of somebody who's going to do something like this. At one point, he was an honors student. He played junior varsity football and apparently was a good member of the team. And then all of a sudden, you know, he's posting these pictures on social media with guns and knives and for some reason a frog, and started wearing clothes, born to kill. He had this sort of a trench coat covered with Soviet and Nazi regalia. And then all of a sudden this morning, he walks into an art class with a shotgun and started shooting. And to me, again, the question I want to ask, was this kid put on prescription antidepressants? He came from a good family. There doesn't seem to be any reasons why he would be driven to this other than chemicals messing with his brain. Apparently, the shooter also wore an Antifa gang logo. So something just happened to this guy, and to me, we have to point the finger of blame at prescription antidepressants. And of course, the gun grabbers will say, no, it's the fault of those assault weapons. Well, sorry, you're wrong. In this case, it was a shotgun that was being used. And apparently he had a shotgun and a .38 pistol, both of which belonged to his father. And I don't want to jump to conclusions here. I would hope that the father was locking the guns up. Maybe Dimitrios figured out how to pick the lock, or he got a copy of the key. But again, this kid went from being a child that any parent would be proud of to this horror in a shockingly short amount of time. I want to know what medications this kid was on. And unfortunately, the corporate media won't report on that. Law enforcement won't release that information anymore because there has been a clear pattern of these mass shootings involving perpetrators who are either on or withdrawing from prescription antidepressants. Now, going on over to Israel, the furor over what they did on Monday is continuing to build. It's not going away anytime soon. And even Israel is coming to understand they have created a public relations nightmare for themselves. The Arab League is demanding an international probe into Israel's crimes against the Palestinians. There are thousands of people protesting all over the world about this. Now, the Arab League is also developing a plan to counter Jerusalem recognition as the capital of Israel. They're going to employ diplomacy, economic pressure, whatever, to simply say, no, Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel, Tel Aviv is. Tel Aviv has been the capital of Israel for the last 70 years. There's no real reason to move it other than religious fanaticism. And the Arab League is saying they'll have the plan ready in about 2 weeks' time. Now, the United Nations, despite the U.S. veto in the Security Council, the United Nations Human Rights Council has voted to investigate the Israeli response to the protest that resulted in so many Palestinians being killed and wounded. And they're going to investigate that illegal expanding ammunition that was used. The UN rights chief is saying that Israel's Gaza response was wholly disproportionate, directly contradicting Nikki Haley, who said that Israel showed great restraint. And of course, the good news is Nikki Haley does not get a veto over the United Nations Human Rights Council. So that will be moving forward. Turkey is vowing to bring Israel to the international criminal courts over the Gaza carnage. Tel Aviv is out there saying Ankara will be there long before Israel ever is. Because Israel is above international law. Don't you understand that? Article out of Counterpunch. How long will we pretend Palestinians aren't people? And they're talking about just this horrific massacre that took place on Monday. They describe it as monstrous, frightful, wicked, and the words just run out of the Middle East today. 60 Palestinians shot dead in one day, 2,400 wounded, more than half by live fire. This supposedly, from what Netanyahu likes to claim, is the most moral army in the world. It would be a disgrace for any army to act like this. Now, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And there has to be a response to this. There has to be a response. If it's 60 Palestinians dead in a day this week and nothing happens, it could be 600 next week or 6,000 next month. If we accept a massacre on this scale, where will it end? All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Pete in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Obviously, I want to talk about today's shooting, but I'm going to go ahead and flip it and talk about what's going on over there in Israel and Palestine first. And I would say, you tell me the HRC is actually non-binding, though, right?
Yeah, they make recommendations to the Security Council and the General Assembly. But basically, where this war is being fought on out is in the world of public relations and public image. And Israel is losing badly.
It's not losing badly enough, though, Mike. I don't know.
I agree.
Mean,
I absolutely agree.
I want to say that all Jews are anti-Semites, and I'm going to go ahead and contextualize it and say it. Every Jew who believes they're Zionists, and I've heard Jews tell me every Jew is a Zionist. They're all against the Palestinians, who are the original Hebrews. So they're all anti-Semites. Okay, so all Jews are anti-Semites. Let's start off with that one.
Well, for the sake of argument, I don't like the phrase "all Jews are blah," but for the sake of argument, go ahead and finish your thought.
No, that's it, man. That's how simple I like to keep it. I mean,
okay.
Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. The Palestinians are Semitic people, and even without going through the issue of their lineage, Israel is acting in a very anti-Semitic way by putting these people in this giant open-air prison. I actually got a very angry letter from a supporter of Israel saying that only Israelites who speak Hebrew are Semites and everybody else is an Arab. And I wrote back and I said, well, the Arabs are Semites as well, because the origin of the term Semite means descendants of Shem, Noah's son, after the ark came to rest. And I know we're getting into biblical mythology here, but that's the original definition of a Semite. And it's all the Middle Eastern people.
Yes, indeed. And the whole point is what you just said.
Yeah. You know, Israel's trying to co-opt the term to where they're the only Semites and everybody else, is an evil Arab. And that's the foundation for the claim that criticism of the government of Israel represents anti-Semitism, which obviously I disagree with that.
Yeah, you had a conversation with somebody a couple days ago, or maybe even yesterday, about it wasn't the fact that Israelis were actually religious, or the fact that Judaism was religion. Crap, man! I wish I could remember that right now. But the problem with the the Jews is they say, well, maybe Judaism is not religion, maybe it's an ethnicity. Because I've heard that too, that Judaism
they flip back and forth. They flip back and forth from, Judaism is a religion, Jews merely follow a religion, to this claim that there is a Jewish genetic fingerprint. But the reality is that the Jewish people tend to be the descendants of people who were converted to Judaism in the distant past. The Ashkenazi were converted Khazars. The Sephardic were converted, another one of the Middle Eastern people, I forget what it was, Berbers, converted Berbers. So they came from all the different races in the region, and they converted to Judaism. It is a religion, not a race.
Fair enough. Now I want to talk about today's yet another mass shooting here. And the first thing when I think about mass shooting, I think about you and some of the other alt media superstars, and wonder, was this person on antidepressants for one? And It's fascinating to listen to this governor talk about the multitudes of law enforcement that showed up, of course, after the fact.
Yes.
That's fascinating to me. That's fascinating to me that all these guys show up with all the weaponry. I'm like, holy crap, dude. You probably can't even buy half the weapons that these guys are walking around with. One CNN clip that keeps running around, this guy strapped with a sidearm on his thigh. I'm like, are you kidding me, dude? You're not John Wayne, okay? Well, but I will tell you this, Mike. What really bothers me is that roll that keeps clipping around about them taking the 15 or 20 kids out into the yard, making them pour out everything that's in their backpacks, and then this fat bodies. And I'm not kidding about how fat these cops are, going and then doing the search on them, frisking them. I'm like, if you guys are talking about going and getting search warrants for these trailer parks that they keep showing here, why aren't you getting search warrants for all the kids that you're unnecessarily traumatizing?
Well, it's a valid point, but when you're at the scene of a crime, I don't know Florida, or rather Texas law, but I think the issue is that if you're at an actual crime scene, warrants are no longer needed. And I could be wrong on that. Maybe somebody in Texas will call in and clarify that. But at this point, we know that the entire government is just disdainful of the Bill of Rights. And they may pay lip service to it in the Constitution. But look what's been going on around Donald Trump with these national security letters to get around judges, getting FISA warrants with completely fraudulent information. The U.S. government is openly contemptuous of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They'd like to find a way or a justification to just shred it. They've shredded the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. The Second Amendment is clearly under attack. Now the First Amendment is under attack, starting in South Carolina, where they want to start carving out exceptions to freedom of speech. Yes, you have freedom of speech, except when it comes to Israel. You can't criticize them. Then it will be next, you can't criticize vaccine makers. And then it'll be, you can't criticize or doubt GMOs. And this story floating around where the Senate is actually looking at a bill that would authorize the president to just lock up anybody who disagreed with the war policy.
Yeah, it's horrible. I mean, what I want to hear from you, my friend, no disrespect, with all due respect, out of one side of your mouth, you say, I'm going to take the Gandhi approach on the Second Amendment. And out of the other side of your mouth, you say, the Second Amendment is just for what it means to be about putting down tyrannical government employees. I mean, Mike, at what point? I mean, because we all like to say, "Oh, we're Second Amendment advocates." I love it because I told you before, I'm a military veteran. I'm totally Second Amendment advocate. I'm totally the first through the original 13th Amendments. I am totally about everybody, lay people, interpreting the way they're originally read, not the way lawyers, especially the Supreme Court lawyers, like to read them, and especially with the Second Amendment. Where are you, my friend, with at what point do we just say to heck with it? I mean, at what point do we actually initiate the Second Amendment? I mean, that's what I'm getting at.
Well, we don't need to initiate the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is simply a recognition of our natural right to self-defense. And I've been making it clear all along, I'm opposed to any kind of a violent revolution in this country. I don't think the American people are ready for it. A lot of the wrong people will get killed in it. I still think that this government is heading for a Soviet Union-style collapse, and that we just need to be patient and wait for that. Now, it may surprise you to know that Gandhi was actually a strong supporter of the right to keep and bear arms. He thought all the people of India ought to have the right to have firearms.
Well, I didn't know that, sir, so thank you for yet another glistening gleam of intellect, and I will go ahead and leave you that, my friend. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
And Mike, I have to disagree with the last caller. Not all Jews hate Palestinians. There's Jews protesting against. Sure, it might be a small amount, but also the ultra-Orthodox don't believe in Israel at all, Mike.
Yeah, I know that. I was just about to get into some of that right now.
Yeah, because I live in the town next to me. Yeah, it's a huge ultra-Orthodox, and yeah, they don't. I talk to them all the time. They don't believe in Israel at all. So you can't throw everybody into one group. You can't go there, because that just leads to more friction and this or that. But hey, Mike, the school shooting, some might be staged. Obviously, some are real, but it's not just a drug addiction problem or psychotropic drug, but it's also our culture. Look at what our government's doing around the world.
True.
Yeah.
They're setting the example. You want something, bomb and shoot the people. People don't do what you tell them to do, shoot them. They are setting the example. A violent government is breeding a violent population.
Mike, if you heard of The Onion, it's like is it a magazine or a newspaper, tabloid type of, on the internet, The Onion. They had a thing, if you can go on Jimmy Dore, YouTube, and it's the newest video. If you watch it real quick on break, it's a satire on what the Israeli snipers are, like that 8-month-old girl. She was, she scared me, so I had to, they do a satire. So The Onion's even going after Israel.
Well, The Onion is a satire site. That's all they do, and some of the stuff they do is brilliant. And I did see that video earlier today.
Mike, that sniper scared the crap out of me the way he looks.
Yes.
Geez. I mean, and Mike, I want to switch gears real quick again. If I still got time to talk about Angela Merkel's Putin gave her flowers, because remember they met a while ago that he had a dog. She don't like dogs, and probably she don't like kids either, right?
Well, unless they're refugee kids. She loves the refugee kids.
But did you notice, Mike, though, Germany and France, they're both saying, it's up to the companies. It's up to the companies if they want to have sanctions on the companies can take the hit depending on what company. The country themselves aren't going to worry about it. It's up to the companies, to if they want to deal with the sanctions or not.
Actually, the European Union, as of today, is protecting all the European companies from any U.S. sanctions. They're simply saying, we're not going to go along with this. What Trump has done by pulling out of the Iran deal is drive a big wedge between the EU and the U.S.
And that's a good thing, because now it's showing that he gave them the opportunity, Mike, to grow some spine.
I think it's starting to happen. We're seeing it in Poland. We're seeing it in Hungary. We're seeing it a little bit in Great Britain, although Theresa May's spine seems to be softening again. Anyway, listen, Dustin, I got to let you go. We got to do a break for commercials, and we'll be back with another phone call. Okay, for some reason, I'm not hearing the signal from RBN to me, and I have not heard back from Mike in the control room. So I'm going to start talking here and hope that something is going to happen. Let's see, we get some sound back. Let's see here. Wonderful tech here. All right, I have no idea what's going on with RBN at this point. Mike, if you're there, if I can't hear the phone call. All right, so let's get on to this idea about how Jewish people are responding to what happened on Monday, because Dustin is absolutely correct. Not all of the world's Jewish people are fully on board with what happened. Now, a lot of the people in Israel, they want to show support for their government. The government keeps them in a constant state of fear that the Palestinians are coming to kill them. Here in the United States, it's very different. A lot of American Jews have just pulled back from this. Now, you need to understand it is a tenet of the Jewish faith that you never criticize another Jew. That's actually built into the religion. So no matter how badly they behave, like Harvey Weinstein, you don't say anything about it. Okay, I'm going to take a moment here and try and call RBN and see what's going on. Okay, Mike. I'm hearing my. Oh, we're fine now. Sorry for the interruption, people. We had a major technical goof. I couldn't connect with anybody, but we're back on. I'm doing the show over Skype. We're hoping we'll have our regular system back up and running by hour number 3. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for Claire to do the show. So we'll cross our fingers and hope for the best. And I hope my audience is still out there. We wanted to get onto the topic here. As Dustin was saying, there are a lot of Jewish people who are not, in fact, supportive of what Israel has done. Now, seems to be over in Israel, most of their population backs the government because they're raised from birth to believe the Palestinians are monsters who want to come across the fence and kill them all. Here in the United States, it's a somewhat different situation. American Jews are appalled by what's going on, and they're pulling back. So this ultimately might result in Israel losing a lot of both political and financial support from American Jews because they don't want to be confused with this. They don't want to be seen as part of such outright brutality. And there's an article that came on out in Mondoweiss written by a Jewish author, and it's titled, After the Gaza Massacre, How Can Jews Sleep Well at Night? And the article goes on, in our name, horrors are committed, supposedly, so that we would be able to sleep well at night, to have a safe haven while others are uprooted from their homes, maimed and killed for protesting the injustice. And this writer is saying, it's time to realize Israel has constructed a massive outdoor prison, and they don't want the prisoners to remind Israel that Israel threw them in there and then threw away the key. And that's one of the motivations for the brutality over there. Another article coming out of the Real News, Jewish Americans condemn U.S. government support for Israel's massacre of Gazans. And the story is activists from the Jewish Voice for Peace in New York City and Jews Say No held a Gaza solidarity protest outside the office of Senators Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, condemning U.S. support for Israel's massacre of Palestinian protesters. Another article coming out from Brass Check, where Jews and Palestinians are protesting together, arm in arm, side by side, saying this has to stop. So again, I equate the Bloody Monday massacre, I'm calling it as Israel's version of the Amritsar massacre. Now, over in Great Britain, 2 parliamentary supporters of the Labour Friends of Israel have now distanced themselves from the group, an Israeli embassy front, as outrage has grown over what happened on Monday. And at her request, Member of Parliament Catherine West's name was removed from the group's list of sponsors overnight on Wednesday. Israel really went across a red line for a lot of people. And another article came on out here from Mondoweiss, basically describing the Monday massacre as murder as a way to make a political point. And it goes on to describe what the conditions are in Gaza. And if you were forced to live under those conditions, you'd be protesting as well. Gaza is a small, densely populated sliver of land whose 1.8 million inhabitants have been suffering under an Israeli blockade for the past 11 years with Egyptian cooperation. And I wonder why Egypt is cooperating, because basically Israel grabbed Gaza from Egypt during one of their many wars here. Half of Gaza's population is under 16 years of age. The unemployment rate is 44%. And again, they refer to it as an open-air prison controlled by Israel. Now, interestingly enough, over at The Intercept, they had an article saying that Gazans have the right to invade Israel, at least if you believe one of Israel's justifications for the Six-Day War. Because when Israel launched the Six-Day War, part of their reason, their justification, was an embargo by Egypt. And Israel said that's justification to go to war. Well, right is right and fair is fair. Gazans, under Israel's justification for invading Egypt, have a right to invade Israel. Obviously, they're not going to do that. But we do need to look at the fact that Israel is not totally in the right on any of this stuff. Vietnam has now reaffirmed their support for Palestinian statehood. So the whole world is speaking on out. And in a tremendous humiliation for Donald Trump, the United Nations General Assembly has voted by 128-9 to declare his controversial decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital null and void. This comes just days after the U.S. used its veto power at the UN Security Council to block a similar measure. Vetoes are not allowed in the General Council, now the General Assembly. Now, the General Assembly vote is symbolic. It's not legally binding, but it is a huge embarrassment for the U.S. as it reflects the global opinion. So it's the beginning of the outrage, and it's just overdue. Now, this one is really going to upset a lot of people. Congress is set to consider a new measure to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the contested Golan. It's not contested. It's owned by Syria and illegally occupied by Israel. But apparently Representative Ron DeSantis in Florida, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, introduced a resolution that would basically say the United States recognizes Israel as the owner of the Golan. Oh yeah, that's going to calm things down in Syria quite a bit. Now, and I knew this was going to happen, Turkey is ruling out returning Afrin to Assad. Remember when Turkey started pushing over the borders, chasing the Kurds, and they took the city of Afrin, and Syria said eventually we would like it back, and Turkey said, yeah, no problem there. Well, no, they're not giving it back. Now, they're trying to basically cover the land grab by saying, well, we're putting the area under local control. It's the local population. They should be able to decide for themselves what they do. In other words, Turkey has installed a puppet government over Afrin. Everybody's chipping away at Syria bit by bit. Afrin, the Golan. Meanwhile, Assad's forces have seized strategic territory in central Syria, and they restored government control over a large area, securing a power station, a refinery, and a cement factory after uprooting the armed opposition. And now the Syrian forces are starting to move into southern Syria to get the rest of ISIS and these U.S.-backed rebels out of their country. Now, apparently, over at the Security Council, there was a resolution to renew a United Nations chemical probe in Syria after the investigation failed to determine who was behind an alleged chemical weapons attack in Syria in February. Yesterday, we reported that the OPCW had found evidence of chlorine gas being used, but they wouldn't say who was responsible for it. So Russia vetoed it, and it vetoed it because in the eyes of Russia, the U.S. is trying to turn the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons into a manipulation instrument to exert more pressure on Syria. And yes, that's exactly what the United States is trying to do. Over in Afghanistan, interesting little article coming on out saying that the longer the U.S. stays in Afghanistan, the more drugs are coming on out. And production of opium, trafficking of opium has increased by 1,000% compared to levels in 2001. It's a 10-fold increase since Washington announced its intentions to invade Afghanistan. That's why we've got cheap heroin on the streets. That's why the pharmacies have got all this opium to put into opioid drugs and get the doctors to prescribe them. That's where it's all coming from here. Now, this next statement is very, very alarming. Donald Trump is warning Kim Jong-un that unless he makes a deal to denuclearize, he could end up like Libya's Gaddafi. And it sounds to me like he's threatening not only invasion, but assassination. But in effect, Trump has just admitted that Libya was not a genuine grassroots revolution, as was claimed by the corporate media at the time. All this bellicosity. Trump's foreign policy is all about bullying and threatening. There's no more negotiation. We're taking the idea of you just do what we tell you to do or bad things are going to happen. They're running the U.S. government like it's the mafia. We got to take a break for commercials and we will be right back. The ending here. But again, getting on back to this bellicosity and bullying situation. Apparently, there's tough talk coming out of Congress. Senator Lindsey Graham is out there saying that the United States will destroy Kim's regime if threats from Pyongyang continue. Well, look who's doing the threatening. Trump is already saying he may send in U.S. military to force North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons. That is very, very risky if North Korea still actually has any. The U.S. government did not want peace on the peninsula. They did not want the Koreas to reunify. They purposely went out and did things that would be very insulting to the Korean mindset, like flying that nuclear-capable B-52 right up to the border, John Bolton's ridiculous demands, all this tough talk. It's almost a repeat of how Roosevelt provoked the Japanese into the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, North Korea is saying that it will not hold talks with the South unless some of the differences can be settled. Well, I thought that was the whole point of having talks in the first place, that you were going to be settling your differences at that point. But apparently Kim Jong-un is upset with Moon Jae-in over those military drills. And again, Moon Jae-in, I think, got suckered. Moon Jae-in should have said, the drills are off until after all these summits. Okay, hang on just a second. Give me a minute. I'm going to have to deal with the control room here. Yeah. Okay. I apologize for the empty air. I apologize for all of this dead air and hemming and hawing, but I really do not like doing the radio show over Skype. For one thing, I can't take phone calls. I can't communicate with the control room, and it's very, very difficult. Getting on back to the Koreas. It turns out there are a lot of people in South Korea who are trying to help the North Koreans. And apparently over at the DMZ, there is this little island which is very, very close to North Korean territory. And there is this group of people who make up these improvised care packages inside plastic bottles. And they'll contain uncooked rice, U.S. dollar bills, other materials, USB drives with information, and they'll just throw them into the ocean by the hundreds, knowing that the currents and the tides will carry them up to the shores of North Korea. So I think that's a very, very cool thing, although now that it's been in the media, I imagine North Korea might crack down on that. Donald Trump is out there. Okay, I'm hearing the music now. We got to take a break for station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are closed. Obviously, we're doing the show over Skype. We've had a kind of a technical glitch where we're unable to communicate using our normal system with the RBN control room. Was working fine, and then all of a sudden it just cut on out, and RBN is just having difficulties getting us back up. We're hoping that it'll be back up this hour so that the Lady Claire can join us, because if the Lady Claire is unable to join us, then, you know, obviously that's going to be a bit of a problem. We only have one mic and one headphone on this situation. All right, getting on back to the news here. Donald Trump is once again on his high horse regarding NATO and coming into the White House during the campaign. He did make a valid point. The United States, meaning you, the taxpayer, bears a disproportionately large portion of the cost of NATO, and the reason the U.S. government did that was so that it had more control over NATO, to turn it from being a mutual defense pact to a, well, basically a tool of aggression. But Trump is now back on out there saying that NATO members will be dealt with if they refuse to pay more for the military alliance. And he singled out Germany for saying they're not spending enough on the military. Well, Germany doesn't really have the money. None of these countries do. They'd have to borrow it. They're hovering on the edge of bankruptcy, both because of the European Central Bank and the refugee crisis. And Trump's on out there saying, yes, we have to spend more money on war, more money on war, more money on war. Now, it's actually been a while since anybody has seen Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The last time that he was heard from was April 21st, when there was an attack on the royal palace in Riyadh, possible coup, and it was reported he was hit by 2 bullets, and he hasn't been seen in public since. And even when Mike Pompeo went over there to his visit in Riyadh, there was no joint photo, which would be the normal protocol. And so a lot of the Middle Eastern media is wondering if, in point of fact, Mohammed bin Salman is actually dead. And of course, if you're looking for a precedent to conceal the death of a leader, go back and look at Francisco Franco. That became a joke. Saturday Night Live made jokes about it, where it was obvious that he passed away, but the government of Spain was thrashing around trying to fill the power vacuum their way and kept denying that he was dead. So it may be a repeat of that same situation. Now, here's a ridiculous piece of propaganda. Up in Ukraine, they ran this story. It actually came from Ukrainian officials. Apparently down in Crimea, Ukraine had been developing military dolphins. Dolphins that are trained to go on out and attach, well, like limpet mines to enemy ships, go on out and kill frogmen, SEAL team members in the water. And the dolphins haven't been seen for a while. So Ukraine is out there saying that the military dolphins starve themselves to death rather than be under Russian control. And Crimea came on back and said, actually, the dolphins were demilitarized and sold to other institutions. And they're not in Crimea anymore. Sometimes the propaganda can get just a little bit ridiculous. Apparently, up in the Donbass, North American instructors have been killed as the result of an explosion. There was a vehicle with military instructors from NATO countries was hit by, basically drove over a mine, and this was reported in the Operational Command of the Armed Forces of the Democratic People's Republic. So, again, already things are cranking up in Russia and Ukraine. We're headed for a world war. It's absolutely, at this point, inescapable. We are heading toward a world war. Now, Russia has responded to the United States government's condemnation of the Crimean Bridge by saying that it's, okay, let's see. I think we're going to get back onto our Twitch here. All right, I'm hanging up on the Skype. All right, here we are. we got back here, and that means the Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. So the United States government came on out condemning the bridge built by Russia across to Crimea under the U.S. assumption that Crimea is still part of Ukraine. This goes all the way back to that claim that Russia stole Crimea, which is not what happened. Following the coup d'etat, the U.S.-backed coup d'etat that took out Yanukovych and put in Poroshenko, the Crimean people held a referendum and said, we are leaving Ukraine. And then they had another referendum that said, we would like to join the Russian Republic, and that's exactly what happened. Russia didn't steal anything, but the U.S. government's attitude is we refuse to recognize the right of the Crimean people to vote themselves independence, even though they have that right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so the U.S. is still pretending that Crimea is part of Ukraine, and they're saying, how dare Russia build a bridge to connect the people of Crimea with Russia? And Russia has responded by saying, we don't need your permission. It's really none of your business. So, again, U.S. foreign policy just seems to have turned into this belligerence and bullying and who knows what all else. There's no diplomacy anymore. There's no negotiation anymore. It's might makes right. And sooner or later, you wind up with wars all over the place, and that is definitely where we're heading. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And obviously, the phone lines are now open again, if you'd like to call on in. The boys in the Pentagon are back out with their hands out, despite all the money they've already been given, for which they have produced a lot of junk. And at the 34th National Space Symposium in April, U.S. Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson announced that the service is taking steps to secure its satellite network by working with allied forces, commercial satellite owners, and international organizations to share satellites currently in orbit. They're also talking about needing a satellite supply chain. Now, currently, satellites put into orbit are built one at a time. They're handled like prototypes, and it makes them very expensive. And what the secretary is saying, they want to build a factory that's an assembly line that cranks out thousands and thousands of these satellites so that as adversaries who have these ASAT weapons shoot them down, they can be replaced. This is the space age version of the Liberty ship in World War II, where they built these incredibly inexpensive, rapidly built cargo ships to send cargo across the Atlantic, and built them faster than the Germans could torpedo them. And that was basically the thinking there, and the thinking has come back here. But what that means is more money for that supply chain, and it should be remembered that the United States also has ASAT weapons. And my concern, which I've shared with you before, is if we allow a real shooting war to go into space, we're going to basically turn it into a shrapnel zone. Down here on Earth, when you shoot down an airplane or a missile or a drone, it falls to the ground, burns, and that's the end of it. But out there in orbit, if you blow up somebody's satellite, a lot of those pieces are just going to go into different orbits, and they become missiles that can basically hit other satellites, destroying them, releasing more shrapnel that can destroy more satellites, that'll release more shrapnel. And we could wind up literally living on an Earth where low Earth orbit is so full of undetectable, untrackable pieces of debris flying around that we don't dare go back into space. All right, let's take some phone calls. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Wow, Mike, busy day.
Yes.
Hey, by the way, if you ever go off again, it was a great choice to play Bob Seger's Like a Rock. I could listen to that forever. But you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you just fine. I'm hearing you just fine. I hope
good,
not to go
good.
off the air again, but we need a better system. I don't know why Skype quit working on these laptops. I've gone through so many laptops over here trying to stay in communication with RBN. I've got one more I can try and put in there, but it's Windows 10, and I'm really not happy to be working with that again.
Well, I definitely vote for Bob Seger, Mike. But hey, listen, I wanted to make 2 points. You discussed at length the sort of American Jewish community starting to distance themselves from Israel. You mentioned, for one, Jewish Voice for Peace. You ran an article earlier in the week by Gilad Atzmon.
Yes. And
talking about how he's doing a tour, and Jewish Voice for Peace was shouting him down and following him around and getting his venue shut off. And I personally judge, and I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace and Pink, Code Pink and all these other things. But my watershed on issue on whether or not these guys have any really semblance of legitimacy is, do they believe in the Palestinian right to return? And frankly, Jewish Voice for Peace does not, nor does J Street, the lobbying. I mean, a lot of them don't. And I hate to see the whole Palestinian cause framed by a non-Palestinian organization. But the second thing is the use of language, Mike. And you were having a conversation earlier with the guy, and you were talking about Shem and all that stuff. And I've heard people call in and talk about Gog and Magog, and I've heard people call in and talk about Khazars and all that stuff. And you know what? It's a moot point. And I want to, talking about language, the point I want to make here is that if you, why even bother? Nobody refers to a 2,000 or 2,500-year-old document that the Bible, that nobody knows who even wrote, some mystical document from 2,000 years ago, has any sort of basis in legality or international law. But it plays right in to Israel's strength. They've got a massive apparatus of rabbis and temples and people, scholars who can come in and debate this about this mystical crap 2,000 years ago. And I had a conversation earlier in the morning with my sister, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, who always repels from my use of language like Nazi, genocide, things like that. She's saying it's too loaded. And of course, in all the free speech things, they're trying to make it illegal to say that. But I submit to you, what could be more apt than a country whose racial doctrine of racial superiority, chosen Aryan master race, just like the Nazis, who wants Lebensraum or living space, just like the Nazis at the expense of other people, who invades a whole bunch of other people, who relies on fifth columns all over the world to get what they want done. And by the way, the poor Gazans, I would tell you, if they had a choice of living in Gaza or putting on yellow stars and walking, they'd take the yellow stars any day.
Yeah,
just to get out.
The inmates in those German slave labor camps were actually treated a lot better than Israel treats the Gazans. The people in the Warsaw Ghetto had better treatment than the people in Gaza.
And that's the point, Mike, because we cannot allow them, which they're trying to do illegally here in the United States, in all these states with the anti-Semitic redefining it as criticism of Israel. We cannot allow them to dictate the terms and have it all on biblical stuff, but they're well equipped to fight that, which is all mystical crap anyways. But we've been bombarded with their own propaganda about how evil the Nazis were every day. As a matter of fact, there's on TV, there's channels that are nothing but Nazi this, Nazi that.
Yes.
And this is jujitsuing them. This is saying, here, we're taking what you've been bombarding us for years, and we're applying it to you, and it is apt. It really applies. It applies to Israel more than any other country I've ever seen. And it's taking away, and it's using, semantical jujitsu on them. And I think that's the way to go. And by the way, Mike, it bothers me sometimes when people refer to the massacre on Monday. They've been massacring people all month, for a month, and for, of course, 70 years before that. So, refer to it not just as Monday's massacre or Bloody Monday. There's many Bloody Mondays, and just in the last month, they shot down 10,000 people, crippled them. A whole generation.
But what happened on Monday, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes, and now they're going to start looking back over the history of relations between Israel and Gaza over the last 11 years and realize, this is part of an ongoing slow-motion genocide. And by the way, people who say don't use such loaded words, they're just trying to tone you down. We should use the most loaded words that we can to describe what happened, because it was, in fact, a massacre. These snipers in their fortified positions just fired into the crowd. I mean...
Yeah, that's not even such a slow-motion genocide, is it, Mike? When there's thousands, and it's exactly my point. It's linguistic jujitsu on these guys, and you can't allow them to control the terms of the discussion.
No, you can't.
So,
they try and hijack words, like, for example, Semite, which applies to all of the Semitic people, the Arabs, Palestinians, and so forth. Israel wanted to co-opt it and say, we're the Semites, and all the rest of those are just Arabs. And therefore Untermenschen.
Yeah, and like the word Holocaust, they go up to that. You can't say that the Cambodians went through Holocaust or the Armenians went, because that's their word. They've taken that over.
Yes.
And you cannot allow them the terms of the discussion, because they'll screw you over every time. So, and the whole apparatus of that biblical stuff, they've got thousands of temples and rabbis to fight that war for them. They've been talking about that for years. All that mystic crap anyway. It's just like the New Testament is, in my opinion, as well.
Yes.
But that's conceding their fight. It's fighting on their ground. That's my point.
Yes. All right. No, anybody who's been in debate understands that if you allow your opponent their first prime assumption, you've already lost the debate.
Yeah, they're framing the terms of the entire discussion. So,
okay. Anything else, Peter?
No, that's it. Thanks, Mike. Best to Claire, stay out of the ash.
We're doing our best here. We're going to switch over to Mike in Chicago. And Mike, I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Yeah, go ahead. Check it through the break.
Mike, are you there? Mike in Chicago?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I hear you. And what's on your mind?
Well, nothing. I was going to bring up. I like to stick on topic, but I was going to bring up the shooting that occurred today.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, again, I talked to you about this before. The child. I mean, however nice of a kid he was, he took his father's shotgun. I understand when I heard the report. I didn't read it yet or nothing, but again, there has to be some kind of responsibility when you have children in the house with your weapon. When I bought my weapon, I was given a gun lock, with it, and I use it, and I have one adult living in my house right now who's not a child, but I would lock up my ammo and my guns and everything
if I had any children.
You have to do that. You definitely have to do that. Mike, stay on the line. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And Aloha America, welcome back to our show. And again, a reminder, the Front Sight Academy promotion has been extended until June 2nd. So you still have an opportunity to take advantage of this. And again, as I've said, if I was living on the mainland, anywhere near Nevada, I would take advantage of this deal myself. It is that sweet. We're talking with Mike in Chicago. And yes, anybody who's a responsible gun owner, you keep your guns locked up, your ammunition locked up. That being said, the case down in Florida, the guns were being locked up, but the shooter had a key. And unfortunately, most locks that you will find on gun cabinets and so forth are not very good. They're very inexpensive. Everything's value engineered, and they're easy to pick. And you can go out on the internet and find all kinds of instructions on how to pick locks. And until we know for a fact how this shooter in Texas got the guns from the father, I'd like to find out, were they locked up and how the kid got them. I don't think we should be rushing to judgment on the father. But if he didn't have them locked up, that's obviously an error of judgment. On the other hand, as I said, this kid, through most of his life, was a parent's joy. Honor student at one point, junior varsity football team, and he was doing fine. And then all of a sudden, he just turns into this monster. And that's why I'm really focused on, this is another case of prescription antidepressants frying some kid's brain and turning them violent.
Yeah, am I on here, Mike?
Yes, you're on the air.
Yeah, okay. No, that's exactly what I was just going to say. The investigation is going on now, and we're not going to find out, but hopefully we will find out. Kids are amazing. You were a kid, I was a kid one time, and I used to go in my mom and dad's room, and I knew he had a shotgun in the closet. I knew he had a pistol in the drawer. I saw the ammunition. But you know what? I mean, I wasn't on antidepressants. I was a kind of a troubled kid because I didn't spend a lot of time with my dad like most kids should. But I wasn't on any of these reuptake inhibitors that at some point I understand could have an effect where you crash, and you might go into a psychotic episode. I don't have that knowledge right now to tell you, but that definitely could be something besides the father not locking his weapons up. Definitely don't jump on him. But again, the investigation. But 10 people that have died. That is just unbelievable. I mean, and this is really going to stir up some people. This story. There's no doubt about it. But again, all as we could say is, get the word out. In fact, my gun is, my gun is hidden, and it's got a lock on it. I mean, so I don't want to be responsible because a lot of criminals break into people's homes, and take them. There's criminals in other countries, South America. They'll walk up to a security guard and baseball bat him over the head just to take his weapon, so that they can have a weapon, a gang member, So yeah, it's no doubt about that. But anyway, we'll see how it works out. See if there was prescriptions involved. That should be definitely pretty interesting to find out.
Well, we're going to have to work to find that out because the media has stopped reporting on that because they want to protect the pharmaceutical industry. And the real irony in all of this is after all these kids have been drugged, research is showing that the theoretical mechanism of SSRIs doesn't actually work anyway. And you're absolutely right. By blocking the brain chemistry, eventually there's a crash and a breakthrough. That's what happened to me when I was put on these medications by my doctor, and that's why I will never, ever take them again. Mike, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Yeah. And we're going to start with Francis in North Carolina. And Francis, I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break as well. What's on your mind?
Aloha to you both.
Aloha.
Aiea. I have to agree with Dustin's commentary from Joyce about you cannot compare all people that are Israeli or Jewish, whatever terminology you want to use, that comes from Israel. I have to agree with that assessment because, quite frankly, that would be the same as saying that if you take all of the citizens in the U.S. and compare them and say that they're the same as the government and the military-industrial complex in the U.S., government structure and all that, that, you know, you're basically painting everybody with a broad brush, even though a lot of U.S. citizens do not agree with and are vehemently abhorred against the government structure in the U.S., let alone the military-industrial complex, among other ones, for that matter. So the aspect of going and, I mean, basically in the past history, apparently people have forgotten about it, and a lot of people don't care to think about it. A lot of people have gone through persecution regardless of whether it's ethnicity, their sexual background, their, I guess I said ethnicity for that matter, religious perspective, you name it. I'll hang.
Yeah, we've got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take a few more phone calls, then we're going to close the lines because I got a lot of news to get through before the Lady Claire joins us. As you know, we had that huge interruption during hour number one, and I'm way behind on the news. So back to Francis, and yeah, it does seem like the history of mankind is just filled with all kinds of iniquities and repression, and a lot of it is based on religion. As Mark Twain used to say, man is the only animal that has the one true religion, several of them. And it's amazing how much blood has been spilt in this millennia-long argument over whose deity has the biggest dick.
That's a good way of putting it. One last thought to leave with you and other listeners is this. Just because you have a tree that produces several apples from it, and the first one that falls from that tree because it is rotted or whatever does not mean it's the one you should take the seed from to propagate from it. If anything, there are other apples that last a lot longer and have a lot more fortitude to them that you should take to propagate the seed from, not the rotten one. Only people who are of a low heart that is dark and greedy and selfish and hateful will take that first apple. Later.
All right, thanks an awful lot, Francis. We're going to switch over to Terry in California. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, am I correct in assuming that 90% of the people in Israel are descendants of converts from Eastern Europe?
That's a good estimate, yes.
And if that's true, then all this stuff about the chosen people and right to return and anti-Semitic, they're the victims of anti-Semitism is all out the window. You know, it doesn't apply to them at all.
No, it really doesn't. It's all been hoaxes and lies and religion. But you do need to understand that after the Khazars converted to Judaism, it only took a few generations for them to actually believe they were the descendants of the Israelites. And so that was kind of the origin, because that's what the rabbis were teaching them. You know, that one of the lost tribes of Israel had come north to Khazaria, and that's where we all came from. And it wasn't true, but then religion is not based on the truth. It's based on wishful thinking and belief.
Well, you know, really, they're the biggest anti-Semites in the world because they're mistreating the Semite people, and they're not even Semites. So
yeah, we had another caller made that point.
How does the Sephardics come into this? So do they convert about the same time?
No, they converted much earlier, and the Sephardics are actually a blend of original Hebrew and Berber genetic lines.
Yeah. Well, see, these people are Caucasians from Eastern Europe, and, you know, back in the days of Abraham, there's no Caucasians over there. They were just, you know, Middle Eastern Semite people. So, again, you know, they hijacked something that wasn't theirs, and they're making a big deal out of it.
Yeah, they are.
Anyway, that's my only point today, Mike. So I'll let you go.
All right, thanks, Terry. We're going to switch over to Jay in Oklahoma. Aloha, Jay. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You know, it's amazing to me how you and RBN have this love affair with saying that God loved Shemites when the Bible clearly says that God hated Edom, who was a Semite.
Now, first of all, I never said
forget that.
First of all, I never said. Hang on. I never said God likes the Shemites.
Wait a minute. Why do you always tell me to hang on and then you talk over me when I'm talking?
Because you talk over me.
Why don't you hang on a second? I got a little bit more to say.
All right, Jay, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go and go to Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Hey, this just in. Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead.
Yeah, good old Saturday Night Live. The original really was funny. The current one, along with pretty much what passes for comedy on TV today, it's just liberalism run wild.
Right, it's crazy. But my actual stated purpose for my call was about SSRIs and the Second Amendment. I see this as sort of what could become this mental health issue, which could become sort of a linchpin argument of the left against the Second Amendment, to say that at the time the Second Amendment was penned, the United States was much smaller. There were fewer people. They were much less densely distributed, and there was less mental illness overall. I almost, I'm waiting for them to declare the populace, mentally ill until proven sane, and you have to prove you're sane in order to get a gun permit. But then it's catch-22 is you have to be insane to want a gun. So the left, I think, can muddy the waters that way. The strongest argument in favor of the Second Amendment from the right seems to be wherever you look in the world, in various countries or in various cities, it is always the countries that forbid the populace to have guns who have the most gun crime and murder. So I almost can see them squaring off across this particular dialectic. People are too crazy to have guns on the left, and taking away guns leads to more gun crime on the right.
Well,
I just sort of seem duking it out in that time.
Just keep in mind, those Palestinians on Monday are not allowed to have firearms. I mean, Israel's gun laws do not mention race or religion, but you have to get a gun license with the permission of the government, and the illegal settlers always get them, and the Israelis always get them. Palestinians, the license is always denied. So if you want to know what's going to happen if the general population is disarmed, you take a look at what happened in Gaza last Monday. And then remember, every single genocide of the 20th century was preceded by a gun ban on the targeted population.
Yep, bingo. Yeah, Alex has that famous rant where he said, Stalin took the guns out.
The report from the Justice Department's Inspector General. It's being described as extremely long and thorough. Copies have already been sent out to certain selected officials for a review. It's expected to be released to the general public within the next 3 to 4 weeks. And apparently it just goes into quite a lot of detail. Some little snippets are already sneaking on out. We were talking yesterday about how there may actually be a criminal referral because some of the FBI officials in the handling of the investigation into the Hillary's private email server issue broke federal criminal law. And one of the big scandals that's starting to come on out now is that James Comey and Loretta Lynch colluded with the Clinton campaign to entrap and wiretap Trump and his campaign. And this illegal scheme involved the entire U.S. intelligence community. We now know that the FBI planted a mole inside his campaign. This is already bigger than Watergate. Now, Giuliani is out there saying that Comey should be prosecuted for leaking classified information. And it's a shock to me that I'm agreeing with anything Giuliani has to say, but I agree with him. Comey should be prosecuted. He took those memos that contain classified information and he leaked them to this professor who gave them to the corporate media, and this was Comey's gotcha at Trump for being fired. Meanwhile, today is the one-year anniversary of the launch of U.S. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into allegations of collusion between Donald Trump and Russia, and so far they are batting absolutely zero, which is why they're thrashing around looking at porn stars and other issues like that. Now, Mueller has already come on out and said he cannot indict Donald Trump, and he's trying to say it's because of sovereign immunity, but I think he's just trying to save face. He didn't find anything he could indict him with, or it would have happened by now. So, according to this article over in Sputnik News, the Mueller probe is a substitution of litigation for politics. And it was a hatchet job. It really was from day one. Now, Obama is getting dragged in on this, and it has to do, again, with this collusion situation. And everybody was on board. But Mike Rogers, retired National Security Agency Director Mike Rogers, stated that the fake news Christopher Steele dossier was used in evidence in part to prove Putin's motivations. Now, he's still playing the game out there, but what he's done is inadvertently expose the fact that John Brennan, Obama's former CIA director, lied before Congress when he testified that the dossier was not used in any way as part of the assessment. Rogers' letter also proves that the Obama cabal conspired to use fake news to advance the Russian collusion hoax and undermine the legitimacy of American democracy and elections. Now, DiGenova, Joe DiGenova, a veteran D.C. attorney, is out there saying that Brennan needs a very good lawyer because he's about to be called before the front of a grand jury, looking into some of the things he did. This is a horrendous scandal. This is all the intelligence agencies, the previous administration, the opposing party, all were involved in this. This is bigger than Watergate. And probably right now, some of those people are thinking about making a deal. Now, they're not going to be in a rush to do it because they remember what happened to Seth Rich. But they're also thinking the first one to make a deal gets the best deal. There's probably a lot of people out there saying, I'm not going to take this all on my own. I'm not going to go down alone here. Now, over at the FBI, they're working to soften the potential impact if their top secret informant is exposed. Now, they've been trying to protect the identity of this informant who provided the FBI with information. It may be that this informant is the mole who was placed inside the Trump campaign. But the FBI is trying to find some ways to mitigate the potential fallout from this and try and insulate this situation from the rest of the government here. Okay, I'm going to take one phone call and one only from Errol in the Netherlands. Errol, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, Mike. How is Claire's back doing?
She's doing better. She's finally getting medical treatment. It only took 3.5 months to get her into the to Straub Clinic and everything. What's on your mind?
On my mind is how is it possible such a woman that have committed crimes against humanity by waterboarding, and she is now a part of the CIA.
She's head of the CIA. She's been part of the CIA for many years.
Exactly.
But now she's head of the CIA. And by the way, we know that worse things than waterboarding was done to some of those people because one of the released prisoners, Binyam Mohammed, went public and he actually showed journalists the scars on his bodies where they were slicing at a very tender part of his anatomy with razor-sharp knives.
I saw something else. From Poland, there was a guy, and he was not subject to any crime. And he got out after, I think, about 10 years. And he got $2.5 million euros or dollars, whatever.
Okay.
2.5 million for exact. And I think, and I was looking at all the news sensations and everything. I was like, okay. So this is a subject of. I want to say one thing to you.
Got to make it quick. We're running out of time.
Very quick, very quick. It is a shame. It is a shame that someone that did those atrocities to humanity and put them in place. I find it a shame.
So do I.
Thank you for taking my call, Mike.
All right, we're going to close the lines again because I'm way behind on the talking points. Some of this stuff is going to have to seep into Monday. Anyway, there's a new scandal that is coming on out. From 2001 to 2005, there was an ongoing investigation into the Clinton Foundation. A lot of people were saying, don't do that, don't look there. A grand jury had actually been impaneled. Now, governments from around the world had donated to the so-called charity, yet from 2001 to 2003, none of those donations were declared. Now, you would think an honest investigator would be able to figure this out and do something about it. But guess who took over this investigation into the Clinton Foundation in 2002? James Comey. The entire system is rotten and corrupt. There is no salvaging it. We're just going to have to sit back, not get caught in the crossfire, and wait for it to tear itself down. And it's going to happen. Things can't go on the way they are right now. There's simply too much corruption. Nobody's out there actually trying to do a decent job of running the country for the American people. Now, a company with close ties to the government of Qatar is reportedly nearing a deal to bail out the flagship Manhattan property owned by the family of White House advisor Jared Kushner. So, again, the money is flowing to the people who can influence the president here. Robert Wilkie's been nominated to be the Veterans Affairs Secretary. Took a while to get that done, but it's finally been done. On the subject of vote fraud, Fox News ran a story from DeRoy Murdoch, who's contributing editor of the National Review, and they tabulated voting data, registration data across the country and discovered there are 3.5 million more registered voters than adults in the United States. Massive, massive election fraud. And if Trump doesn't deal with that, he's going to be a one-term president. Actually, the way he's going, he's going to be a one-term president anyway. Maybe that's why he doesn't care about the problem. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And talking about the economy, Trump's heavy-handed tariffs and sanctions are causing even more friction with Europe. And Macron and Merkel are basically angry and raging over the steel tariffs. Now, Trump, upping the situation, has given Angela Merkel an ultimatum. Get out of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project or there will be a trade war between the U.S. and Germany. Trump is getting bad advice. He surrounded himself by a bunch of parasitic sycophants who are letting the fact that they're in the White House get to their heads, and they're just not thinking things through. Are they all on antidepressants? I mean, that kid in Texas walked into a school with a shotgun. Trump's going into the Mideast with drones and cruise missiles. Now, starting today, the European Union will block U.S. sanctions against Iran. And basically, apparently, back in 1996, there was a blocking statute preventing the enforcement of U.S. sanctions against Iran. It has been brought back into effect. So we're seeing our alliance with Europe start to strain. If Trump alienates Europe, that could shatter NATO. And of course, he's out there screaming that the European nations need to support NATO more. Article that came out of Sputnik News, the U.S.-China trade dispute, why Beijing will win the war Washington started. And, well, there's a couple of reasons. One, China is a manufacturing powerhouse. And two, the U.S. is saddled with a vast amount of unpayable debt. And you don't want to have a trade war if you don't have a resilient economy, and we certainly do not. But Trump is out there on his little Twitter feed saying that China has been ripping us off. He does not understand diplomacy, and he doesn't understand the Asian mindset. What he's doing is going to be seen as very offensive by the Chinese. It'll be seen as offensive by anybody to be accused of ripping somebody off, but it will be especially offensive to the Chinese. Now, the Chinese are now saying they have control over all the oil and gas activity in the South China Sea, and there is a reason it's called the South China Sea. And there are other covetous nations, like Vietnam and the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan, who want to come on in and grab a piece of it. And apparently the United States wants to help them do it. But again, back at the end of World War II, there was a treaty signed, the Cairo Convention, that returned all of the land stolen by Japan in World War II to their original owners, and that includes those islands in the South China Sea. So yet another example of the U.S. government not holding up their treaties. We're going to take a quick break for station identification. Back with the lovely Claire after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, as always, in hour number 3 on Friday. And what is your first story?
Well, Mike, I am very annoyed about a lot of issues today. And with this information coming out that there was a potential CIA spy or an FBI spy implanted into the campaign, this is scary. And you know what James Clapper said on the CNN interview? He made the observation, he doubled down, that having a spy from the FBI was a good thing.
What else is he going to say?
I mean, hello.
Caught us in the biggest scandal since Watergate?
Yeah, hello. And apparently the Daily Caller's Julia Nista pointed out the hypocrisy of former Director of Intelligence Clapper, who said last night that it was a good thing that there was an FBI informant on the Trump campaign. Now, this is coming from a guy who pledged to uphold the Constitution and defend the Bill of Rights and defend this country from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. Did he realize how horribly the optics of him having made that statement were going to be received?
Well, I mean, they're trying to basically get Americans used to the new normal. Remember when Pelosi was saying that she saw absolutely nothing wrong with rigging the primaries?
Yeah, yeah. And I have 2 words for this gentleman. Those are utterly tone deaf.
Okay.
Okay, all right. It looked like you were listening or watching.
No, I was responding to something in the control room.
Another little bit of detail on Gina Haspel, our new CIA director. She said only one detainee's torture was taped, but she was wrong. Now, she claimed that the torture tape she helped destroy showed only one detainee's torture, but she oversaw torture on a second taped detainee. And it could be like a small misstatement that anyone might make, but it doesn't do much for Gina Haspel's relationship with the truth as Donald Trump's potential next CIA director.
Well, she's the actual CIA director now. She's been confirmed.
And the CIA documents indicate that 2 detainees had their torture at the hands of the CIA and recorded on 92 agency videotapes in 2002 at a black site Haspel eventually ran. The vast majority of the tapes showed Abu Zubaydah's torture, but a few showed the torture of Abd Ramil al-Nashiri, whose waterboarding and other torture occurred under Haspel's watch as the chief of base that she ran between October and December of 2002. And I have some observations out this. Mike, the choice of Haspel for the job was completely logical on Trump's part. And what is he telegraphing? He is telegraphing perpetual wars under his watch, seasoned with torture, will be the rule of law, and the Geneva Conventions will be darned.
Well, there's a problem with that.
Yeah.
And that is if the U.S. government, not if, we already know, the U.S. government is torturing prisoners of war.
Yeah.
And that means that when we go to war against these other countries and your sons and your daughters are captured, they'll be subject to torture.
Yeah.
There's going to be no safeguards.
No. And that was one of the points I wanted to mention, particularly if members of our audience or viewers have family in the military. And also, when this country tortures or outsources it, the other is that the rest of the world understands that the humanitarian values this country claims it practices are only practiced in the breach. And that's a really nasty reality, not in the observance. And back in World War II, there was a German interrogator, Hans Schnarf, who was very respected by the American and British prisoners of war who he interrogated. He never hurt anyone. He did everything he did with kindness. He would take them out on day passes for cultural events and feed them decently. And Mike, if you remember, at the end of the war, this man was so highly respected by the U.S. government and military that he was invited by the American military to teach his techniques to bases all over the country.
He was brought over as part of Operation Paperclip.
Yeah.
And it basically shows, first of all, anybody who understands intelligence gathering knows that torture does not actually produce actionable intelligence. What it produces is a politically expedient confession. And that's all it produces. And so what we're going to be seeing in the future, as we've already seen in the past, is people tortured into confessing to the made-up crimes used to justify the war.
Right.
And you need to understand, the U.S. government, the CIA, tortured innocent Iraqis to death.
Right.
To find the nuclear weapons, which, as
Didn't
it turned
exist.
out, never existed.
Yeah. And people who torture like to hurt people because they can, and psychologically get off on the process and know that they will be able to get away with it with impunity.
You know about the old story about the sadist and the masochist?
Talk to me.
The masochist says, beat me, and the sadist goes, no.
And it's interesting to me in this choice of Haspel because the fact that President Trump and his advisors chose a Torquemada archetype as the director of the CIA. And by the way, for those who may not know, he was a primary torturer during the Inquisition. Rather than a Scharf archetype does not bode well for peaceful American foreign policy at any time soon.
Well, American foreign policy is not peaceful. As I was saying earlier in the show, the diplomacy has vanished. Negotiations have vanished. America's foreign policy is taking on this might makes right mentality. It's all bullying, bellicosity, blustering, and basically the U.S. government is operating like the mafia. You do what we tell you to do or something bad's going to happen. It's a nice country you've got there. It would be a shame if something bad happened to it.
Yeah, exactly. And this kind of feeds into the next article that I found from antiwar.com. And for those of you who would like to explore other sites, I think antiwar.com is a very solid site. And this article is titled, Republicans' Apocalyptic Fantasies Are Now Playing Out in the Middle East. And what it says was that more than 20 people in Gaza were dead Monday morning before anyone in Washington had had their breakfast. This was pitched to the awakening nation as a series of deadly clashes, even though the deadly part applied only to one side. It was a great start to the day in which the president, who doesn't know anything about anything, prepared to toss a lighted match into a lagoon of gasoline in the Middle East. And this genocidal behavior on the part of the IDF toward the Palestinians, Mike, is encouraged and abetted by President Trump's acquiescence to the move of the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It's coupled with the end-time insanities of Reverends Jeffress and Hagee, which are very dubious in terms of both their biblical origins and interpretations, and the rabidly wretched racism of Israel Chief Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef, and it's painting a very ugly picture of 21st century Israel.
Well, I think what happened on Monday may be the turning point, because everybody has been looking the other way at what Israel's doing to Palestine and the West Bank, because they've been taught to believe the Jews are God's chosen people. They suffered through the Holocaust. We have to allow them to behave like this because of all they've suffered over the last 2,000 years, which is nonsense. And now all of a sudden, I think people looked at what happened on Monday and they're saying, no, we can't look away from this. And we're seeing all these stories about how American Jews, they're appalled by this. They're pulling back. They don't want to support Israel any longer, either politically or economically. And this may have been one step too far. I think a good parallel, of course, is the Amritsar massacre.
Yes, you have mentioned that to me in conversation. Yeah. And I really like the analogy that the author of this article used, likening what Trump has done here geopolitically as being akin to tossing a lighted match into a lagoon of gasoline. And it's very adept.
That's exactly right.
And I would like to point out to our listeners and readers, people in the Middle East do not like us for our freedoms, dislike us for our freedoms, as the war criminal President Bush famously used to love to say. They dislike us because U.S. foreign policy in the region has been completely outsourced to the country of Israel, and Americans have been forced to live with those negative consequences of that Israeli outsourced foreign policy for way too many years. This is the foreign policy that led to the war with Iraq, may well lead to a war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, a continuing war against Syria, and a war against Iran. Now, trust me on this. Tel Aviv wants those wars outsourced to the U.S. military, but only at the cost borne in American blood and American money. Now, Mike, I'd like your opinion on this. The only political leader I'm seeing right now as an adult in the room on these issues in terms of potentially stopping further wars is going to be Russia's President Putin.
I'm in agreement. He is the only adult in the room. Everybody else is behaving like spoiled children, or even worse, psychopaths. And they do fit the classic pattern. Snap decisions, very self-aggrandizing, seeking positions of wealth and power, and totally oblivious to the suffering of others around them. And I got an email from somebody who was challenging me on my theory that many of these mass shootings are staged to support the gun grab agenda, saying our government would never do that. And my response to that is, look how many millions of people the U.S. government has been killing just since the end of World War II. Of course the U.S. government will kill anybody that suits their purpose, including American children, if they think it's going to accelerate the process of disarming the American people.
Absolutely. And I think that that reader at some point is going to have his Buddha moment on the road, if you will.
Yes.
A moment where the reality of seeing this, and it's very hard for people of our generation. As I have mentioned, I turned 69 last week. And I was always taught, and my school books always taught me, that the USA was always the right guy doing the right actions in the world for the right reasons. Oh, my heavenly Ned, not anymore.
And maybe not ever at all, because the schools are there to propagandize the children. I mean, every school in every nation teaches their kids that their country is great, their government is kind and just and fair. And that's unfortunately what schools are for. It comes out of the Prussian model. Educating the children to be more useful to the government than to their own parents.
And, you know, if anyone can stop this madness, it will be Putin. But even he may not be able to stop what I am seeing as the American rush to war in the Middle East, again, to control their pipelines and to control in what currencies that oil will be sold. We have another very serious article about Ecuador. Ecuador is about to remove Julian Assange extra security from its London embassy.
That does not bode very well.
Yeah.
Now, he is an Ecuadorian citizen, but the problem is getting him from the embassy to the airport onto a flight to Ecuador. At this point, it looks like somebody found the right button to push because Ecuador weeks ago cut off Julian Assange from the outside world.
Yeah.
No phone calls,
Yeah.
no internet, no visitors other than his lawyers. And now they're talking about basically ending his sanctuary in the embassy, at which point he's going to be picked up either by the British or U.S. authorities and treated very, very badly.
Yeah. And he made the order after revelations of a multi-million-dollar spy and security operation, which was set up for him. But the president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, has ordered the withdrawal of additional security assigned to the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he's been in hiding and sanctuary for almost 6 years. And the move was announced, interestingly enough, a day after an investigation by The Guardian and Focus Ecuador revealed that the country had bankrolled this multi-million dollar, easy for me to say, multi-million dollar spy operation to protect and support Assange. And there were international security companies and undercover agents to monitor his visitors, et cetera, et cetera. And, but there's a problem here. And I think what has happened has been that the president of Ecuador, President Moreno, has just put a knife to the throat of Julian Assange by removing this extra level of security. And Mike, here's my take on this, and you may differ from me. The UK and US both want an example made of him to demonstrate to the world as to what happens to truth tellers who are honest in their information, which in any way negates their governmental narratives and propaganda.
Well, you're absolutely right there.
Yeah.
And that's why the independent media is under attack now. We're garnering a larger and larger audience every day.
Yeah.
CNN has lost 1/3 of their viewers just in the last year.
Yeah.
And their brand is so badly damaged. Alex Jones the other day was saying they might actually change their brand, call it something new.
Right.
And so, this is the start of a crackdown.
Yeah.
And I imagine they're going to be trying to go after people like Edward Snowden again.
Yes.
And we know what they did to Seth Rich.
Lord, yes.
So it's a very, very serious business out there right now.
And but I'm thinking that extradition to either country for a kangaroo court trial, where he's tried, convicted, and jailed, may not be enough to sate the hunger of these two deep state countries for blood. And I mean potentially literally.
Well, you see,
now,
trying him in court is going to be a little tricky.
Yeah.
Because Julian Assange himself did not go out and acquire any of this information.
Right.
He ran the website where it was being put on out.
Yeah.
And he ran the website to shield whistleblowers.
Right.
In the wake of the fact that all of the whistleblower protection laws have been rescinded.
Yeah.
So people who are reporting government and corporate wrongdoing are no longer protected. They can be prosecuted and they can be sued by the corporations.
Yeah. But now I'm hoping and praying that this doesn't happen because of the anger of both governments at Assange and the wanting to make an example. And I'm praying this doesn't happen, but if he is executed, I think we need to look for the most grisly, slow, and horrific method as either his executioner can conjure or what he's been ordered to do.
Well, now you're coming up against both British and American law, which says executions have to be quick and painless. It's been a long time since they actually used that woodblock and axe at the Tower of London.
Yeah, but you see, this is going to be in the presence of nobody else. It may be staged to look like a robbery.
What's the point of making it horrible and grisly as an example if nobody sees it?
Well, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
There will be images plastered all over the media as an example of what happens when you cross the line by actually telling the truth. But there is a caveat I would like to politely point out to both governments of the UK and the US, that such an act will make him a martyr in many eyes, no matter who does this.
Yeah.
And many in the independent media who admired his courage and his honesty will look up to him even more. And I would say that his reputation may grow exponentially and become an even more meaningful inspiration to the independent media.
And of course, WikiLeaks is still going to continue.
Yeah. The horse is out of the barn, as my late grandmother would say, I think, on this issue. But it's
we did this story.
Yes, I know you did. So I'm scrolling down here. And the next thing I have, I know that you touched on this a little bit. I'd like to explore it a little bit. The threats on North Korea, and this I don't understand why the president made this statement, because right now I am having a Picard double facepalm at Felicity. And unfortunately, just because something is the most ham-fistedly, pig-headedly stupid thing an American government official could say or do is no guarantee that they just won't haul off and do it. And I think that was the same thing with the so-called Libyan option with North Korea. Now, I know President Trump is a smart business person, but I'll tell you, there are moments when he comes across as a rather blunt instrument. And yesterday was one of those terror-inducing moments when he did just that.
And we have to take a break for commercials, and
Okay.
we'll be right back.
All right.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we go back to Claire's talking points, we were just watching during the break Fox News, and they're reporting on the fact that all 34 bishops in Chile have had to resign over a sex abuse and cover-up scandal. And now they have been summoned to Rome, possibly to avoid arrest.
Yeah.
And right now, the Vatican has paid out something like $3.5 going on $4 billion to settle all of these lawsuits.
Yeah.
And these are people who present themselves as representing the supreme moral authority on earth.
Yikes. That's more than a little scary.
That's false advertising. I've got to tell you that right now.
You know, it's something that has to do with the culture of the church. Now, I'm not saying there aren't Protestants and Protestant groups where this isn't a problem, but the preponderance of these cases seems again and again, Mike, to be with the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. It just keeps going on.
I think the celibate policy is a big cause of it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, your biology will not be denied.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you are somebody who likes to prey on children, nothing is going to protect you better than those priests' robe.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
This went on for a very, very long time. Nobody dared talk about it because they were going to go to the dark places when they died.
Yeah.
You know,
that is...
can't rat out Father O'Flaccid.
Ouch. You know, but it just... They never... The higher echelons of the Catholic Church, like the Pope, are going to have to take a proactive approach on this. Otherwise, they're going to be sued out of existence, Mike.
Yeah. Be kind of interesting to see a foreclosure notice on that Vatican.
I wonder who'd want to buy it.
That's a very nice place, actually.
Yeah, it's
make
beautiful.
a heck of a museum.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Should see what's in there.
Unless he actually gets his hands around that, this is just, you know, this has got to stop, and it needs to stop, and he needs to be the proactive Pope who gets it to stop.
Well, he's dealing with, you know, in a way, he's got the same problem to deal with that Donald Trump does. The institutional bureaucracy is protecting the status quo.
Yeah.
Okay, and so, anyway, your next talking point.
All right. Fighting is displacing tens of thousands of Yemenis near the key Houthi port. And this is
the last port that the Houthis have. If the Saudis cut it off, then they're just going to starve the entire nation into submission, which, by the way, is a war crime.
Yeah. The civilians say that they are facing terrifying mortar attacks with rockets flying overhead and landmines ripping people to shreds. Amnesty International is reporting that the worst is yet to come for the nation as the offensive worsens. And as you just said, Aiea is the lone source of humanitarian aid for roughly half of the country, which makes it a strategic target. But the fall of the port also means that half of the country, the half already on the brink of starvation and recovering from a record large cholera epidemic, will be under even tighter siege, Mike.
And by the way, they've just discovered the cholera vaccine doesn't really work.
Oh boy. And the continuing Saudi genocide in Yemen, Mike, aided and abetted by U.S. military forces, has to be one of the worst silent screams of the 21st century. And I say this because not one of the prostitute corporate U.S. media outlets is covering this. You have to go to an independent outlet like us. And I posted some very disturbing images of what is going on. Children getting maimed and killed, babies getting maimed and killed, Yemeni civilians seeking relief from the heat getting maimed and killed. And I said, doesn't it make you proud to be, and I have a new phrase for people who are citizens of this country, a war American.
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah.
I like that one.
And I can't stress this enough, please go to the website, look at what I posted. People, if we are not a part of peaceful public dialogue to at least get the U.S. government to withdraw its military and financial aid to the slaughter, we're part of the problem. I want you to share.
The U.S.
go
government is the problem.
Yeah.
It's out there trying to basically bring the entire world back under its unipolar control, drag the world back to Bretton Woods. They're in a corner because they've allowed our nation to basically rot into decay while we serve the war machine and Israel and Wall Street. So we don't manufacture quality products other nations want to buy.
Right.
Nobody wants our GMO agriculture.
Oh, no.
And so the last option is let's just go on out and take what we want.
Yeah, and when you talk to your congressional representatives or their aides, tell them that you know about this issue and it's a re-election non-starter. If they continue to support the U.S. efforts in Yemen, it's a non-starter for the midterms for you.
And everybody needs to call because if only a few people call, the candidates will just figure the election fraud will put them in anyway. But if it looks like there's going to be an overwhelming landslide against all pro-war candidates, then they might have to do something.
Yeah. We can and we do have a voice in the most peaceful and polite way. We have to use it and right the heck now because this is a genocide going on in Yemen.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You don't make war on civilians. That's one of the fundamental rules of war.
Yeah.
And yet Saudi Arabia is just out there bombing everybody. And again, we're into a commercial break.
Yes, we are. Can you hear anything, dear?
There it is. There's
okay.
the music.
All right.
It's a little late coming up. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, what is your next story?
Well, the next story is, I think, a very interesting one and one that should have happened. Russia's investigative committee has launched a criminal case against an American journalist who wrote an editorial calling on Ukraine to bomb Russia's newly opened bridge to the Crimean Peninsula. Tom Rogan urged the Ukrainian government to launch airstrikes and destroy elements of the bridge to Crimea in a Washington Examiner magazine op-ed published on Tuesday. Kiev, the U.S., and European Union criticized the opening of the road and rail bridge and called it a violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity. And the investigation has detected signs of public incitement to terrorist activity in the territory of the Russian Federation, the investigative committee said in an online statement on Thursday in reference to Tom Rogan's article. The publication's editor will also be a subject of pre-investigation probe for publishing Rogan's commentary, said investigating committee spokesperson. So I say good for Russia. I mean, this kind of alleged journalism is fit only to line the bottom of a bird cage or pick up a puppy's leavings on the grass when walking the dog.
And that's a shame because Washington Times used to be a pretty good, reliable source of information. But if they're putting out this kind of nonsense...
They got turned.
And again, they're still pushing that idea that Russia stole Crimea. That is not what happened.
Yeah.
The Crimean people voted in a referendum overwhelmingly to leave Ukraine.
It was actually two. One to leave Ukraine and one to petition the Russian Federation to join it.
And both referendums passed with a landslide.
Yeah.
And that's what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
But the U.S. refuses to recognize the right of the Crimean people to have self-determination, even though that is guaranteed by the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yeah.
And so the official story is Russia stole Crimea, and our foreign policy is being built around this fairy tale.
It was an absolute lie. It never happened. And even President Obama stated and admitted on one occasion that the U.S. was very much complicit in the Maidan riots and what toppled Yanukovych, who was the duly elected president of Ukraine, and installed Poroshenko, yes. And now the U.S. will not extradite this guy.
No, of course not.
But the sheer level of irresponsibility of egging people on to destroy property and lives, as demonstrated by this article, is never acceptable, Mike, in the realm of international relations.
Well, like I said, in international relations, America's foreign policy has become all about bullying and throwing its weight around.
Yeah.
There's no more diplomacy, no more negotiations. It's all tough guy talk.
Yeah.
This is just more of the same.
Yeah.
Again, this course is going to get us into, well, we're already in a world war, but it's about to get a lot worse because the U.S. government won't back off. They've succeeded in throwing a monkey wrench into the two Koreas moving closer together.
Yep.
They're up there in Ukraine, getting ready to help stomp the Donbass flat. It's just a war, and of course, they still lust for war in Iran.
Yes, absolutely. Now, this was reported, and I think it may hold some hope. Putin and Assad held extensive talks in Sochi discussing political settlement, and I think this is positive. Russian President Vladimir Putin has held a meeting with the Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad in Sochi. The acting presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the two leaders conducted extensive negotiations, and as the two presidents talked about conditions that would facilitate the peace process development, the Syrian leader said that he had decided to send a delegation, a committee tasked to rewrite Syria's constitution.
Send a delegation to a committee tasked to rewrite Syria's constitution, which was championed by the United Nations.
Yes.
Now, that is a nice gesture until you realize that what the UN wants to put in as Syria's new constitution is designed to basically bring them into the growing new world order.
Yeah.
I can imagine there was one tense moment between Putin and Assad over the S-300 missiles, which had been promised to Syria.
And then after Israel,
after the meeting with Netanyahu, Putin declined. Now, maybe the S-300s are on again.
Yeah.
But again, you're right. Putin is the adult in the room. He's trying to get everything tamped on down. Unfortunately, I think he's fighting a losing battle.
Yeah.
As good as he is, as powerful as Russia is, he's only one world leader, and we have way too many world leaders who see a new war somewhere as their best option, either to improve their economy by pillaging other countries, or to distract from their own corruption and crimes, like we're seeing with Netanyahu.
Yeah. And it appears to me that if this goes forward, these moves have put President Putin and President Assad at least 500 chess moves ahead of the United States and Israel here, both of which want to see Syria balkanized. But I've got to doubt, Mike, at this point, that Russia is going to allow this to happen. What do you think?
It's very iffy. I mean, right, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the U.S. Congress is actually looking at a bill which would grant U.S. recognition to Israel as being the owner of the Golan Heights. And Turkey is refusing to give Afrin back. So Syria is already being chipped away at the edges.
Yes.
And I don't know how far Putin is willing to go to try and maintain Syria's territorial integrity. And by the way, isn't that a laugh? When you have on the one hand, they're saying we've got to protect Ukraine's territorial integrity. And on the other hand, they say, well, we're going to whack off the Golan Heights and say that Israel owns it.
And whack off other pieces for
and
Turkey.
Whack off other pieces. Well, Turkey did the whacking off in that particular case here.
I know.
I think Putin wants to just basically tamp out in fact, unfortunately, he's playing firefighter in a room full of pyromaniacs.
That's a lovely analogy. Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. What do you think is Erdogan's end goal in his invasion of Syria, Mike?
I think he still wants to get rid of the Kurds.
Mm-hmm.
And he does, unfortunately, seem to be very angry these days.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't blame him for that, following that failed coup d'etat,
Yeah.
which, of course, was U.S. sponsored,
Mm-hmm.
U.S. controlled.
Mm-hmm.
And he's become a wild card. And if you look at the Middle East as a machine,
Mm-hmm.
there are all these moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
And the U.S. is no longer able to keep a tight control over them,
Right.
which means any one of them can spin out of control. And I would say probably the first one that's going to do that will be Turkey.
And what do you think they're going to do when they do spin out of control?
The whole area is going to just erupt. It's going to be war along all the borders. Everybody's going to pick sides. And we were already hearing out of Tehran that if Israel tries to bomb Iran,
Mm-hmm.
that the Middle East will then reunite against Israel. So the whole situation is just horribly inflamed right now.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's looking for their best option. But as I said before, there are too many world leaders who see war as their best option.
Yeah.
To grab territory, to grab wealth, to grab control of the pipelines,
Mm-hmm.
to basically unify their people. You know, you can't vote me out of office now. We're in the middle of a war.
Mm-hmm.
Or as I said in Netanyahu's case,
Mm-hmm.
to distract from the crimes and corruptions.
Right. Right. That is really. We live in some very unfortunate and dark times.
We live in very, very dark times. We're doing the best that we can with them.
Yeah.
But this nation really, this government has really mutated into something very horrible. And I keep coming back to the analogy. It's running like an organized crime gang.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you look at this revelation that the Obama administration, along with the Clinton campaign and virtually every intelligence agency, were all involved, not just on spying on Donald Trump, but trying to entrap him.
Yeah.
That is a scandal that is bigger than Watergate.
Mm-hmm.
And, hopefully it's going to start coming on out somewhere. But of course, the corporate media is just going to try and keep a lid on this until it becomes too obvious that they're ignoring the story.
Yeah.
And that's where the independent media comes in. It took us a month to get the corporate media to even acknowledge the Downing Street memo.
Right.
Their
right.
attitude is now
remember.
it's not newsworthy. And of course,
Yeah.
it was big story all over the internet.
Right. And speaking of illegality and elections and all that stuff, all that jazz, Circuit Court judge says ballots were illegally destroyed in Wasserman Schultz House race. And this is Florida Circuit Judge Rag Singhal, and he has ruled that the Broward County Supervisor of Elections Office violated state and federal law Friday after the office destroyed ballots from a 2016 House race for Democratic Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz's seat. Now, Mike, I am singularly unsurprised at this.
Well, what's going on here, of course, you remember Debbie Wasserman Schultz used to be head of the Democratic National Committee,
Right.
Was hand in glove with Hillary Clinton, stealing the primaries away from Bernie Sanders.
Right.
And when Hillary lost, Debbie Wasserman Schultz had to get another job, so she went back home and ran for that seat and won it. And here's where the skullduggery comes on in. The election was won by a narrow margin, and her challenger did initiate a request for a recount. And then Debbie Wasserman Schultz basically told the state supervisor of elections that there was no challenge to her victory, and they could go ahead and destroy the ballots, even though under law they're required to hang on to them for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
So this is telegraphing the fact that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is still in the business of stealing elections and covering it up afterwards.
She's, and I am not unsurprised because this is precisely how the Clintonistas operate. If they cannot win fair and square, they will cheat, lie, steal, and obfuscate.
They don't even try and win fair and square. They go right to cheat, lie, and steal. That's,
It is, as a matter of fact, the only way they know how to do business. And it's very sad. And the people who believe in them, I think, are getting snookered big time. I wish that the Democratic Party would think about running our representative.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Yes, Tulsi Gabbard. She is a multiple threat. She is very bright. She is pro-peace. She is minority. And she is, of course, a gal. But I think it's that pro-peace thing that is going to prevent her from having a chance to even get in the primaries. What do you think?
Well, it all depends on whether she runs before or after we lose the war.
Ah,
Because
okay.
after we lose the war, a pro-peace candidate is going to be a shoo-in.
Yeah, I think
Pardon
so.
me.
Yeah,
Still under the weather here a little bit.
I know.
But the situation here is our election system is totally out of control. It is all lying and cheating and fraud and deception, aided and abetted by the corporate media. And now, of course, they're starting to panic because polls are showing the American people don't trust and believe the federal government anymore.
Nope.
They don't trust and believe Congress.
Nope.
They don't trust politicians in general, and they don't trust the corporate media. And lying to us has been how control has been exerted over us through much of the nation's history. But for most of the nation's history, the American people were naive and trusting. They believed what the corporate media was telling them. They had no reason to believe they were being lied to. Today, we all know different.
Yeah.
And so the U.S. government and the corporate media are trying to figure out some way they can regain control of what Americans are thinking. And so far, they're failing rather miserably.
Genie's out of the box.
The genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah.
And everything that they're trying to do to recapture that control only makes it look worse.
Yeah.
Like that bill that is under consideration that would allow Trump to just lock up anybody indefinitely without a trial simply for publicly disagreeing with the war agenda, even though that is protected by our First Amendment right.
That is chilling. That is absolutely
it's
chilling.
Very chilling.
You know.
And I'm hoping if it is actually passed into law, somebody has to mount a First Amendment challenge at the Supreme Court. That's probably going to be Judicial Watch or Freedom Watch will do that.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to take that South Carolina law.
Oh, yeah.
About equating criticism of the government of Israel with anti-Semitism and take that to the Supreme Court under First Amendment challenges. Because if the camel's nose gets under the tent by carving out an Israel exception to the First Amendment, they won't be the last.
No.
They'll say you've got freedom of speech, but you can't talk about Israel, can't talk about vaccines, can't talk about GMOs, can't talk about whatever they're trying to protect.
Yeah.
Can't talk about prescription antidepressants.
Yeah. Another article I thought was highly ironic. Apparently, the Russian stock market has brushed off U.S. sanctions, trading near an all-time high. And it's proving to be resilient and showing a strong recovery from the initial shock of the latest round of U.S. sanctions targeting the business sector. The ruble-traded MOEX reached 2,358 points this week, which is very close to the all-time high of 2,376.96 seen in February. The dollar-traded RTS index is still over 10% down from the February highs, but has been recovering. Analysts are pointing to the good signs in the Russian economy and growing price in crude oil. The victorious march in the market goes on. And apparently there are an influx of new investors in shares following the good situation in commodities and stable macroeconomic indicators, said Freedom Finance analyst Georgy Vashenko in a note. If the trend doesn't break, the MOEX can go to a record high of 2,400 points. And Mike, at this point, Russia's President Putin is laughing his head off right about now, and for good reasons.
I would disagree. I'm sure he's buoyed by the news, but it's too soon for anybody to be laughing.
I know.
But interestingly enough, down in Italy, there are these two anti-Euro, anti-Brussels parties that have now formed a coalition. And it looks like they may actually take power in the next election. They're anti-immigrant. They want to kick all of the refugees out of Italy. And they're calling for the ending of all anti-Russian sanctions because these anti-Russian sanctions are causing more economic harm to Europe than they are to Russia.
Yeah. And, what is President Trump going to do? Go to war with every country that's going to ignore the sanctions, which is going to be a ton of them right now, if I'm looking at the current read of Europe correctly and the Middle East.
Oh, yeah, there's sanctions and tariffs all over the place. And as I mentioned on the show just yesterday, what the U.S. is doing with all these sanctions is walling itself off from the rest of the global economy. They tried to weaponize the idea of sanctions, weaponize the global economy itself, and it's backfiring because it is creating hostility toward U.S. policy in all these other countries, like in Europe.
Yep.
All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, your next story.
Well, I think it's kind of ironic. Fox was just covering this a minute ago. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi defended violent MS-13 gang members in a press conference yesterday, saying they are not animals, a term President Trump dubbed MS-13 members earlier this week. Oh, really, Representative Pelosi? There's an article I put together and found just for you. It's called MS-13 Explained, and I would like you to pay some attention to it, if you are able, that is, to the following passages. MS-13 makes its money through relatively small-time drug dealing and old-fashioned extortion. That extortion can be brutal and sometimes wide-scale. In 2015, they extorted the bus drivers of San Salvador into going on strike for higher wages so that more of their wages could be turned over to the gang. Logical approach, but not as sophisticated in the multitude of revenue streams from other transnational criminal organizations have. Nevertheless, the MS-13 occupies a lot of real estate in the imaginations of many Americans and politicians.
Now, what was really interesting is during this last commercial break, Fox News was actually running a story on this and talking about how MS-13 murders people, but they didn't really go into the details.
No.
And I have an article at whatreallyhappened.com on why MS-13 are animals, and it lists many of the crimes they've committed, including rape, and when they murder people, but when they murder them, the people are being beaten to death slowly. They're being hacked to death with machetes. Hearts are being cut out. One body was beaten up so badly they still can't confirm the identity, which tells you that obviously the dental records aren't going to work here.
No.
So, they are behaving just like animals. And this all started because Trump came on out and said MS-13 are animals. The liberals leapt on and said, how dare you call the illegal immigrants animals? They got soundly trounced by the White House spokesperson saying, no, we weren't calling all of the refugees and immigrants animals, just MS-13. And everybody said that would be the end of it. Nobody's going to stand up there and stand beside this very violent crime gang. But Nancy Pelosi did.
Yeah. And I mean, there is where liberalism as a process loses its mind. And I would like to challenge her and see if she would be inclined to invite a couple of members of this group over for an afternoon tea in your offices on the bet that they are not monsters. I don't think so.
You know, I saw that video clip, and at one point Nancy Pelosi said, everyone has a spark of divinity in them. So we can't call the MS-13. It was absurd. How does this person keep getting elected over and over and over again?
Vote fraud.
Vote fraud.
Yeah.
That's the only possible explanation.
Yeah.
She's out there defending MS-13. She's out there saying she sees nothing wrong with rigging the primaries, which undermines the reason to even have primaries.
Yeah.
Why do voters still vote for her? Or obviously they don't.
Yeah.
All right, there's the music. Time for us to get on out of here. Please stay tuned for the John Stadtmiller program. He's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know, talk to them face-to-face, use email. Don't bother with social media. It is so heavily filtered now, it has become absolutely useless to the American people, unless you're a big fan of kitten videos. So have a really good weekend. Have a safe weekend, and we'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.